So my name is Ruby Orozco Santos. I'm the Director of Storytelling and Development at La Semilla Food Center, and I'll be sharing today about storytelling for connection and engagement. And I'll be sharing a few resources um, for educators. Can you still hear me? My connection says it's not working very well.
I can hear you great,
You can hear
Ruby.
me? Okay, all right.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
think.
Okay, so I'm gonna thank you. Thanks for that. I see the chat. Thanks. I'm gonna introduce myself with a shortened version of this poetry template, which you may have seen and used throughout your careers or experiences. The I am from poem template. I adapted it to be specifically on food waste. And so that's the link that's in the chat right now. Thank you, Elizabeth. Um, and this is a shortened version of it that I adapted for a social media poetry challenge. So I'd like to use it to introduce myself. And before I do, I want to also mention, uh, in the PDF, I think the word used is ancestors. Here on the second slide, I changed it to someone who gave you guidance. And in the PDF, you'll see on the first page, and I mentioned the complexity of uh, talking about ancestors and the acknowledgement that ancestors can be of different types, right? They might be blood ancestors, but they might also be cultural ancestors or social movement ancestors. So expanding our definition of ancestors to include folks who guide us. So all that to say is this template is something that you can definitely adapt for your audiences. And if you'd like to today, while I'm talking, if you want to take like a screenshot of this shortened version or work on the PDF, I would love to make a little time at the end to either hear from some of you, introduce yourselves in this way, or type in your poem in the chat. So I'll come back to that. So for me, I'll share my I am from Jicamas, from streets lined with jacarandas and ojos de agua de Morelos. I am from the new hand mill, metallic stiff, inviting me to take it up for a spin until my arms burn. From Al agua hay que cuidarla, from Rosario and Tomasa, from Ruda and Albaca. I am the metate, pressing sopes, amaranth, and words of gratitude at bedtime, stepping into your power with grace and humility. Um, so today I'll be sharing about who we are at La Semilla and why storytelling fits into our work, and then share a few resources for educators. And so La Semilla is a food justice organization. We're based in Anthony, Texas, and we work in the entire Paso del Norte region and beyond. So southern New Mexico and El Paso, Texas, with direct programming, and then beyond in statewide and national food policy efforts. And so our mission is to foster a healthy, self-reliant, and sustainable food system. And this is talking about Bruno, right? Like, why is that mission necessary? Because the conventional industrial food system that we have today is rooted in a history of injustice, and is rooted truly in stolen land and stolen labor and expertise, and as a result has a very exploitative framework for both humans and non-humans all along the production line. It's also extremely vulnerable to disruptions, right? Because having a very long supply chain makes us vulnerable to disruptions like what we saw on during this pandemic, what we've been seeing. And also the long supply chain hides the injustices, right? So it's easier for us to not notice or know about um, slaughterhouse workers or industrial farming operations issues if we can't see them, if they're far away. And so creating a healthy, self-reliant, fair, and sustainable food system really requires work at different levels. And so we say we're a hybrid organization of land-based programs that tend to soil and create a local abundant food system here in the Chihuahuan Desert. So growing food, distributing it, sharing it in the community, and also systems changing policy and um, cultural programs. And so here are some of our direct programs, um, and then some of the more policy oriented programs advocating for more equitable food policies. And so how does storytelling fit into this? Um, so foodways, if foodways are the ways that we grow food, that we share food, distribute it, that we prepare it, um, then wordways are the ways that we um, use words and culture, right, to connect to each other, to guide each other, to show respect for the earth. And so wordways and foodways intersect, and that's nothing new. You know, for me, my first experience with poetry was listening to my grandmother describe a tomato, you know, while she was preparing food, inviting me to notice the like divinity of it almost, right? Like look at this beauty of creation and look at the color and look at the texture, and hearing her improvise poems when she watered her plants, and when she talked to her plants, you know, and knowing that she's not unique, right? So words and songs have always been part of food traditions for many indigenous cultures and cultures throughout the world. So there may be songs or prayers used to plant certain foods or to harvest certain foods, to tend to them, to prepare them. So our words create culture, um, and they can be supportive towards our land connection um, and food connection, and they can also be harmful, right? So, for example, during the colonial rule of the Spanish in what is now Mexico, um, certain foods were outlawed, like amaranth, right? And so there wasn't just um, the legal banning. There was also a cultural and narrative change around foods. So amaranth greens, which are a kind of quelite, a wild green, became synonymous for worthlessness, no? There's a phrase in Spanish that's me vale un bledo, no? It's like I don't give a bleep, right? And so, and also this notion of like beans being poor people's food, right? And the foods of um, the other foods like bread and meat being a sign of acculturation, assimilation, and wealth, and being a more preferable. There's some studies around that in the cultural anthropology. And so also the letters back to Spain that describe nopales as like a monstrous tree, right? So a lot of um, hierarchy and um, it, aside from the banning of foods, the burning of food fields, all of those things. And so at La Semilla, we have been tending culture in different ways since our founding. But more recently, in the last couple of years, created the storytelling department to be more intentional about foodways and culture and how that integrates across all the programs, right? From school-based education to community-based education, policy, and just regional broader narratives. Um, And so our purpose with storytelling is to uplift those inherently healthy traditions of people in the Paso del Norte region, to increase connection with our Chihuahuan desert ecosystem, and ultimately to shift power, right? To create and support more fair policies and increase support for small farmers and food waste practitioners who are tending the soil and tending culture in the region. And so how do we do that? It's a mixture of story gathering and sharing, which might happen with folks across the region, as the Zoom video snapshot here shows, or in-person events. I might be archival research. It might look like direct support to cultural practitioners through fellowships, a fellowship. And I'm going to share with you a couple of examples. So these two murals were unveiled last year, and they were inspired by the story gathering session that you saw up here with the Zoom squares. We had a couple of story gathering sessions in October of 2020 where we talked to folks about, you know, food waste, you know, in general. You know, how do you, what challenges do you face when feeding your family, and how do you address them? How are you relating to the land directly? And how are you sharing food waste traditions? And so we were planning to do that, but in the pandemic hit that year, we ended up also asking, you know, how is the pandemic affecting your food waste in all of these areas? And so those were very informative dialogues, and we'll actually be sharing a lot of quotes from that report in this month, now that we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the pandemic lockdown. But I digress. The sessions inspired 2 murals. So at the sessions we had Diné artists Alwoody and Kristen Apodaca, and they created mural concepts based on these sessions, which are now up at Bowie High School. That's where Al is, and Kristen is at La Semilla Community Farm. Another effort that we made is to understand and demystify the nation's agriculture policy. Right? It's known as the Farm Bill, and it's renewed about every 5 years. It's very complex and huge, cumbersome to navigate. And so we wanted to understand, not only from the bottom up, like uplifting our community stories and food waste practice, but also understanding how national policy affects us at a local level. And so in order to do that, this was a collaboration between our policy program and our storytelling program, and with illustrators Peña, who is also from the region. And so what was going to be like a 3-page handout turned into a 64-page small book. It's called Food, Land, and Us. And so in this book, we tried to make it very local. So it comes, the main character is based in Vado, and it's a younger person that has questions about the food system, and they're learning from their elder, right? Like we do so often, learn from our elders. And so throughout the journey in the story, it zooms in and out from the local to the national, from the past to the present, and invites at the end, you know, people to take action. How can you be involved in shaping national food policy? And so the research that went into this, we have 83 sources cited, aside from also a review process. It took about 2 years. And so the, you know, books, articles, archival kind of research, and also consults, right, with living scholars and community members, feedback from youth through our Raíces youth program was really helpful. And some of the reviewers included folks from Isla del Sur Pueblo, who helped us shape not only the spreads that have to do with Isla del Sur Pueblo history specifically, but also Indigenous representation throughout the zine. Dr. Timothy Nelson, and who's a historian, and botanist Maya Allen's work really guided us in, understanding how the history of Black farmers and, on how Black farmers seeking opportunities after the nominal abolishment of slavery weaves into our region. And so the story of Frank Boyer and Bado specifically are part of this scene as well. Mhm. And like I said, the story weaves in and out of local, national, and historical pieces and statistics about the bill and funding and how the money is used. And Zeke did a wonderful job in helping to represent that visually. Also, the zine is available in Spanish as well. And I'm going to ask Elizabeth to share the links here to how you can access the zine. It's viewable for free on our website under our storytelling tab in programs. It can also be downloaded as a PDF or ordered as a hard copy through our store. It's really, thank you so much. It was great to read your notes in the chat. And so we want it to be accessible, so that's why it's free, flippable on our site, and the donation can include $0. So if you put $0 at checkout, you'll still be able to get the download or get the zines mailed. Another resource I wanted to share are our ancestral foods lessons. These are a collaboration between storytelling and our edible education program. And we wanted to create lessons that could be self-directed by the youth. So they're designed and written in a way that a young person would be able to, complete them on their. Michael, yes, it's hard copy. You can order it right there on the shop tab of our website. Mm-hmm. And English and Spanish both. And so the ancestral food lessons are, actually it started as a booklet to the edible education program that was sent to students in participating schools. So edible education works with schools throughout the region, elementary schools, middle schools, a couple of high schools, creating school gardens, and then education tied to the gardens, right? And so during the pandemic, some of the adaptations in programming included creating booklets and kits, boxes with ingredients and supplies for certain activities. And so that's where the ancestral foods lessons are originally. And now on the website, we have the lessons as PDFs in English and Spanish, along with an accompanying video about the lesson. And they're being released every month, I think through May. And there's 4 of them. There's mint and popcorn, I think, out already. And then in March, we'll have amaranth, and in late April or May, we'll have chia. And so those are available as well. Wow, time is, I'm speeding. I was nervous that I would have too much to say and like early. So just a summary of some of the resources I shared with you all today. The I Am From template, PDF handout that was in the chat, and the farm zine, which there's several links depending on how you want to access it, and the ancestral foods lessons. I'm not familiar with the Cherokee Nation's program, but I'm going to check it out. Thanks for letting me know. I'm going to copy this right now so I don't forget. There is a growing and national and international, like continent-wide. I don't know if the word is resurgence or um, trying to find the right word. The poet in me is not satisfied with my word choice, but an organizing and mobilization of indigenous seed savers, chefs, and indigenous food activists. Um, so there are a lot of wonderful projects and revitalization, remembrance um, projects all across the continent, and they're increasingly connected. So I'm looking forward to looking at the Cherokee Nation program. And I also want to share with you all a few more links, because I realized I was prepping this morning that you all would probably want to know about a couple of opportunities. One of them is our Raíces program. It's a youth program. The youth that a while ago provided feedback for our zine. And so it's a wonderful program. It's one of our keystones. And it's for youth ages 14 to 22. I can't remember exactly how many weeks it is, but at the end, youth can get a stipend. And so they learn about the land. They get to be at the farm on Saturdays, and also get to hear from guest speakers like our food policy director. And so they get the sense of the food system from all angles in hands-on and very interactive activities, and then get a stipend at the end. It's a really wonderful program. And in the past, some of the graduates from that program have gone on to become farmer apprentices and then employees at La Semilla, or to start their own farms or food businesses in the so that's a really great program. Another one, I don't know if you caught it earlier, but I mentioned that one of the ways we tend to culture is to provide direct support for fellowship. The links that I'm putting now are for, they're a little bit outdated because this was the call for applications for the fellowship that's starting this week. But we're going to do it again 2 more times in the second half of 2022 and then in early 2023. And the cultural fellowship is a paid opportunity for people who work with food waste and culture in some way. There might be writers, they might be potters, they might be weavers, work with natural dyes, they might be chefs. So a diverse set of practitioners. And so this is a paid opportunity for them to continue doing the work they already do. And so it's $1,500 a month stipend to advance their projects. We don't require that they finish a project. We just ask that they advance it in some way in those 4 months. And if you'd like to join our email list, I'm going to put, well, it's right on our website. You can join our email list and stay up to date on these sorts of opportunities and news or calls to action. The Farm Bill will be up next year. So this is a to learn about what it is, and we're going to be putting that to use to have some outreach and dialogue around it, and opportunities to help shape a better national food policy. And so I have all my links out. I wonder if you have any questions, but curious to know if anybody did the I Am From poem and would be willing to share. So any of that would be delightful.
I just want to say thank you first and foremost. Really fantastic discussion and incredibly important issue, food justice and access to food. Food insecurity is a thought on my mind constantly. And I just want to open up the floor really fast to just get that round of applause in, and then I want all those questions and I Am From poems to flood the chat and the mic. Let's do that first. Yay! All right. So let's open up the floor to questions for Ruby.
I have a question, Ruby. It's Yasmin. I didn't do the poem part, but I did have a question ready. So I was just curious about, I mean, a lot of people don't realize how politicized food is and has been. And I was wondering, it's a two-parter. So one, what the response has been for for the zine, which I love so much. And then two, if you know if educators are already using it in their classroom.
Yes, the response and our educators using it. The response has been really great. I was worried because this started right 2 years ago, 2 years ago before the CRT stuff was happening in a different world, right? Before the pandemic started, it was a whole different world. And so when we were getting the release, knowing that we're naming truth here, we were a little bit concerned about how people might react to it. But um, nothing nothing negative has come away. I'm not gonna would, but I'm surprised we haven't been in a book one yet because we do cite a 1619 project on here. But I think we just haven't, you know, we just have been in certain circles, people that are already interested in this kind of dialogue and education. And I think that also our approach when we share, like when we had a full release back in August of last year, was to be very honest about how it's necessary to reckon with our past so that we can move forward together, right? This is not about division, it's about healing and working together from the soil to policies on way forward that's more helpful for future generations. And so I think that framing has supported our rollout and our release. And in our if you go to download for people, there's an how are you planning to use this? And so we've heard from a lot of educators from middle schools to high schools to college classes and all kinds of college classes like comic book, like graphic arts professors, um, environmental studies professors, so all kinds of different programs. Professors are working with the zine. And so the response has been great. And then also a lot of folks that are organizing not just through the academic institutions and schools, but in community trainings around food justice and food policy. Ordering dozens at a time for their training programs. So I think it's the only resource of its type. There are a few articles out there from the National Association for Sustainable Agriculture. I think, I'm missing the acronym up. There are a couple of articles out there about the Farm Bill, but this format makes it very accessible.
And you weren't kidding. That Farm Bill's a monster. That is it's intentionally so, right? It's intentionally dense and filled with all kinds. Yeah. So this is really fantastic work that's happening here. I have a question since somebody's throwing up in the chat here, and I'm going to jump in here with mine. I have a question about the Raices program and what does my 14-year-old son have to do to apply? What makes him a good candidate?
Oh, yeah. All he has to do is email Ceci, which you should have her number if you,
I saw it on the
let me see if I
IG
can grab it.
page. Yeah.
It's on the IG page and on Facebook as well.
Okay.
What would make someone a good candidate? Honestly, anyone who's simply curious, curious to learn about any aspect of food, of anyone that wants to spend a little time outdoors and a little time like intellectually learning. I think it has a really nice balance of both. Um, the the call for the call is bilingual, so there's bilingual staff. But really, I think that anyone in that age group who is curious and open to learning and being in a in a small cohort for a little while would would be a great match. And we do have to. I'll share that we do have still pretty cautious COVID protocols in our organization. So most of our events are either outdoor at the farm where masks are required or on Zoom. and vaccination is required of applicants. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, any other questions?
I have one. Excellent presentation also. Thank you for sharing, and so important. I'm curious about two things in particular, and I may have missed one of them. As to your program for youth, how was it funded? And then number two, who was the author, I mean the illustrator on your book, please?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So Raíces program is funded. I think it's it depends on what we have. We're committed to running the program every year, and so I think most of the time the funding for that comes from the USDA Community Food Programs, which is one of the programs that's funded through the Farm Bill. Right? There's different funding streams, and and I'm not sure about in the past, but I think that might be the current funding source for this one. Sometimes we also have foundation funds for specifically for youth programs, and that's really helpful from different foundations. I think the 11th Hour is one of them. And then the illustrator for the zine is Zeke Peña. I'm going to write his name here. And oh, can I make a Peña here? Yes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yes, you're welcome. I'll put his website up as well.
And please keep up the excellent work. We need more literature like this for especially youth from our communities like ours. There's not enough of it. There's not enough positive, nutritious content that we tie to culture in indigenous ways, because really this is about indigeneity here in the borderlands. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, the representation piece was high on our list and of the purpose and the approach. And I think that when we got the feedback from the youth when we were piloting an earlier draft, it really brought it home, like how meaningful it was for them to see like their region represented visually. Somebody commented how they liked that this person was learning from their elder because that's how we learn things. And then somebody said, oh, this makes me feel less mad at our cafeteria workers because we realize now that they're like working with what they have to, they have under certain like laws and restrictions and policies. And so it was really, it's really, I agree with you that it's really important. Mm-hmm.